Friends, today's case is so disgusting, sickening, and it will make you angry. Buckle up. I don't think you've heard this one before, so make sure you stay till the very end to hear my 3 point analysis on why this silly cow took her child's life. At approximately 10 p.m. on June the 25th, 2009, a CAL FIRE emergency response team arrived at Yolanda Pena's home in Riverside County. The address was the 44,000 block of Vista Dunes Lane. The team was responding to an emergency call from the residents, and they were met by Pena and her 11-year-old daughter, Jenny. Pena and Jenny pointed the team down a hallway where they found Pena's 3-year-old daughter, Delilah. Delilah was on the hallway on her back, dead. Her body was cold to the touch, and in an indication rigor mortis had occurred. Delilah's arms were stiff and upright at a 90-degree angle from her body. Pena told a member of the emergency response team, "It always got what it wanted. It never did what it was told. It always had its way." You noticed how she's referring to her child as it? Wow, disgusting. Pena held on to Jenny and would not permit her to be questioned by herself. When a member of the response team asked Jenny what happened, she stated she was watching cartoons when Delilah's body was discovered. Jenny stated that the body had been discovered around noon and that the baby needed cooling off. Neither Pena nor Jenny could explain why it had taken so long to summon help. At that point, Pena screamed, "It needed cooling off. It needed help." Early on the morning of the June 26th, 2009, and again on June the 30th, 2009, Pena was interviewed by a detective at the Indio Sheriff's Station. Pena attempted to explain Delilah's death and evidence of burns on her body by stating that on the day of Delilah's death, after Pena had come home after work, Delilah had a tantrum. She then began throwing herself against the wall and pulled a bowl of hot water off a counter on herself. Pena tried to explain other older burns by stating Delilah had been burned by a candle. When confronted with evidence that Delilah had severe bruises and scars on the back of her legs, Pena suggested the possibility that they had been inflicted by Jenny. So now she's putting it on her other daughter. Again, disgusting. At the end of the June the 30th interview, Pena was placed under arrest. At trial, Jenny testified against her mother and provided an account of what led to Delilah's death. That was dramatically different from the one she gave the emergency response team on the evening of June the 25th, 2009. According to Jenny's trial testimony, on the day of Delilah's death, Jenny was at home watching Delilah while Pena was at work. One of Pena's house rules prohibited 3-year-old Delilah from either speaking to or looking at Jenny or Pena. What kind of rule is that? On the day of her death, Delilah broke this rule and Jenny called her mother and reported Delilah's behavior. Pena told Jenny that she needed to force Delilah to start walking around the house in a fixed pattern. At this point, this punishment of Delilah was common and required Delilah walking in a pattern for hours on end. Pena and Pena's friend Lorena also told Jenny to heat up a cup of water in the microwave every 15 minutes and throw it on Delilah. What the f? Jenny did so and testified that the cup of water was so hot she had used to use a towel to take it out of the microwave. Pena told Jenny that if Delilah looked at Jenny again, Jenny was to strike Delilah in the buttocks. Pena instructed Jenny to write down what Delilah had done wrong and write down every time Jenny poured hot water on Delilah. This is sickening. Jenny complied with her mother's instructions because she was afraid of what would happen to her if she did not. When Pena came home, Jenny reported that Delilah had looked at her again. Pena did not respond to Delilah's condition, but to the report that Delilah had looked at Jenny. According to Jenny, Pena went to her bedroom and retrieved a high-heeled shoe. Pena then started hitting Delilah in the head with the heel of the shoe. Pena then threw the child against the wall repeatedly and abused her in the head approximately 20 more times. 20. Wow. When Pena was done assaulting Delilah, she bound the child's wrists, ankles, and face with duct tape, put pantyhose over her head, put her into a plastic tub, and put the lid on the tub. Pena then went to dinner with her friend Lorena and Jenny. When Pena and Jenny returned from dinner, Jenny went straight to her room. Later, when Jenny came out of her room, Jenny saw Delilah lying motionless on a towel in the hallway. Pena took the duct tape off Delilah and told Jenny to hide it. Pena called her friend Lorena and asked her what to do. When Jenny confirmed Delilah did not have a pulse, Lorena told Pena to call police, and Pena did. Before the emergency response team arrived, Pena told Jenny to tell them Delilah had repeatedly herself, that she was a bad girl, and that she had dropped a pot of hot water on herself. Now, Pena actually had a third daughter. Her name was Jasmine. She was 12 at the time of Delilah's death. Jasmine and other witnesses familiar with the dynamics in Pena's home also testified against Pena. Both Jasmine and Jenny reported that Pena had an extramarital affair with a man. His name was Daniel, and that Delilah was conceived during that relationship. Jasmine reported what she knew about the affair to her father. He then divorced Pena. Pena blamed Jasmine for the dissolution of her marriage and began referring to Jasmine as trash. Pena also blamed Delilah because she believed Delilah was the reason her husband would not reconcile with her. No, you muppet, he would not reconcile because he cheated on him. When Delilah was 4 or 5 months old, Sylvia Uribe began babysitting Delilah, and Delilah was often with Uribe for days at a time. Over time, Uribe and Delilah developed a very strong bond, which grew to the point that Delilah did not want to go home with Pena. Eventually, Delilah began living with the Uribe family on a full-time basis, and Pena agreed that the Uribe family could adopt the child. However, in connection with the planned adoption, the Uribe family wanted to change Delilah's name to Myra, and Pena objected. This disagreement led to no adoption. Pena changed her mind, and the Uribes returned Delilah to Pena's care. Now, after Delilah was about 1 year old, Pena's punishment of the 2 older girls, and in particular Jasmine, became unusually cruel and severe. Jasmine would have to clean all the walls in the house, kneel on rice for 30 minutes at a time, and would be abused for lying. When Delilah began living with the Uribes on a full-time basis, the level and frequency of discipline increased again. On an almost daily basis, Jasmine was forced to kneel on rice or concrete with her hands on her head for periods of time longer than 30 minutes. If Jasmine put her hands down, Pena would abuse Jasmine with a coaxial cable or plastic coat hanger. Pena would also punish Jasmine by making her sit in a bathtub with either hot or cold water. When Delilah was returned to Pena's care, the cruelty all 3 girls experienced became extreme. Jasmine and Delilah were not allowed to look at or talk to Pena or Jenny. They were not allowed to call Pena either Mom or Yolanda. Pena referred to Delilah as trash or it. Pena would sometimes shave Delilah's head and call her Daniel. In response, Delilah would cry and say that her name was Delilah. If Jasmine expressed sympathy for Delilah or began to cry when Delilah began to cry, Pena would abuse Jasmine. Initially, Delilah was allowed to sleep on Pena's bed. However, Pena eventually made her sleep on the floor, on a towel, and sometimes tied her to the couch. Jenny was treated better than her sisters and was considered the princess of the family. She was expected to report any misbehavior by her sisters to Pena, which for Jasmine included having fun while visiting her father or criticizing Pena. During this period, when any of the three girls, including Jenny, got into trouble, Pena would spray them with pepper spray or use hangers on them, the heel of a high heel shoe, or a coaxial cable. Pepper spray? Really? In addition to kneeling for extended periods, Pena began making Jasmine walk around the house on her knees, causing the child's knees to bruise, bleed, and scar. Delilah was not required to get on her knees. Instead, as punishment for infractions of house rules, she was forced to walk around the house in the walking pattern. Pena also used food to punish Jasmine and Delilah. Yeah, she starved them. She mixed a concoction of beans, 2 kinds of bread, hot sauce, a can of chili, and an egg, which Jasmine hated, and forced the 2 girls to eat it. You stupid bitch. If they did not eat it, spit it out, or vomit, Pena pepper sprayed them or subjected them to another punishment. In addition to the foregoing, Pena subjected Jasmine and Delilah to 3 other forms of cruel discipline. She used hot needles, drenching them with boiling water and ice water, and restraining them with belts, ties, rope, shoestrings, and duct tape. Pena would heat needles on the stove and put the needles on Jasmine and Delilah's skin, causing them to scream in agony. Pena would leave the needles on the girls until the needles cooled. Regularly, Pena would boil water in pots on the stove, pour it into the bathtub, and then force either Jasmine or Delilah, who were naked, to sit in the tub with their hands on the bottom of the tub. When the girls were sitting on the tub, Pena would take a cup and pour the boiled water over them so that their entire bodies would feel the hot water. Pena would at times have Jenny participate in pouring hot water over her sisters. When Jasmine would attempt to resist sitting in the tub, Pena would strike her head and face and throw her against a wall. One time, Pena split Jasmine's lip. Alternatively, Pena would fill the bathtub with cold water and ice and force either Jasmine or Delilah to get into the bathtub naked and again put their hands on the bottom of the tub. Pena or Jenny would then use a cup to pour ice water over the girl's head. Delilah would calmly accept the ice water, but Jenny saw her shiver, her skin turn grey, and her lips turn purple. Pena would also punish Delilah by sticking her head in the toilet and forcing it under the water. I'm not gonna lie, I'm lost for words. What the fuck is this? Jenny testified that when Pena did this, she could hear the sound of bubbles. When Pena left her house, she would tie Jasmine up with tape and rope and put her in a closet. Jasmine's hands would be tied to a railing at the top of the closet, and she would be forced to kneel in the closet the entire time Pena was gone. The restraints used on Delilah were far more extreme. For a week at a time, Delilah would be tied up to a faucet and a bar because of the length of time she was restrained. Delilah would defecate and urinate in her pants. When Delilah was released, Pena would force Jasmine to clean up the mess. At other times, Pena would put a sock in Delilah's mouth, put duct tape over her mouth, tie her hands and feet with shoelaces or ties and duct tape, and put her in a blue plastic tub which was placed in a closet. Pena and Jenny would then leave the house with Delilah tied up in the closet. The binding of Delilah's left hand was so severe that she lost circulation in 2 of her fingers on her left hand, and they began to shrivel and turn black. When this happened, Pena used scissors to cut off the ends of the 2 fingers. An autopsy showed that Delilah died as a result of continuous blunt force trauma inflicted to her head. The examination showed that she had suffered significant brain trauma and numerous bruises, impact marks, and cuts all over her head and eyes, as well as subdural bleeding. The post-mortem examination showed that Delilah's cheeks were bruised and missing skin. The examination also disclosed significant recent burns on the anterior portions of Delilah's left and right arms. The burns were so serious that in those areas Delilah's skin had begun to come off. In addition to showing the cause of death, the autopsy showed that before her death and over a significant period of time, Delilah had been subjected to severe physical abuse. Her chest was covered with second-degree burns and blisterings. Her wrists, legs, and knees and feet had significant scarring, bruising, and abrasions consistent with being struck with a cord or clothes hanger. Delilah's left hand and thumb were so scarred that her hand could no longer be opened, but it was in a permanent claw-like position. Scars on Delilah's left thumb had fused it to the palm of her hand. The examination showed that two of the fingers on Delilah's left hand had been partially amputated as a result of some non-medical intervention or occurrence. This is making me sick. Only 1 or 3 bones in her left pinky finger remained on her hand, and 2 of 3 bones remained on her left ring finger. The second bone of her ring finger was protruding out of her skin, and at the time of the examination had turned brown due to exposure to air. Delilah weighed 28 pounds at the time of her death. Pena was initially charged in an 8-count indictment, but Pena did not offer any evidence in her defense. Rather, her counsel argued that given Jenny's admitted role in pouring scalding water over Delilah on the day of her death, there was a reasonable possibility Jenny, rather than Pena, inflicted the fatal injuries on Delilah. Pena, you coward. Now, the jury did find Pena guilty on all accounts. The trial court sentenced Pena to consecutive terms of 25 years to life on the murder count, life with the possibility of parole on the torture count, and 1 year, 4 months on the infliction of cruel and unusual punishment count. In addition, the court imposed a 25 years to life sentence on the conviction for assaulting causing the death of a child. Pena's attorney, Thomas Kavanagh, conceded there was abuse in the household. Well, no shit, Sherlock, but told jurors that it was likely that the toddler hit her head on the floor more than once while fleeing from her sister. By the time Pena got home, this child was in a very bad way, he said. The defense attorney said Pena did not get medical help for Delilah, and there was no excuse for that. But those head injuries were caused before Miss Pena got home, and Delilah's other injuries that day were not given at her mother's direction. She did not inflict the injuries that caused her child's death. He said there are big questions about that day and a lack of forensic evidence. He also claimed there was no evidence of injuries to the 2 older daughters and asked the jurors consider manslaughter instead of murder. Now, before Pena was sentenced, the same defense attorney, Thomas Kavanagh, disputed a probation report claim that his clients lacked remorse. Pena, at the scene of her daughter's death, said, "It's clearly hurt. She's crying hysterically. She says something along the lines of, 'God forgive me.'" Now, Deputy District Attorney Lisa DiMaria countered that Delilah was abused and tortured for 6 months leading up to her death in a house of horror and treated worse than most people treat their dogs. The judge in the trial said it was the worst crime he had heard about in his 17 years on the bench. The judge said, "I don't know how one human being can do that to another." So the question remains, why did she do this? Number 1, a moment of stupidity. We got to go back to the affair that she had. Here's my guess. She was living a normal life. Everything was okay. She was married, working, whatever. Day to day, everything was fine. But then, for whatever reason, maybe she was bored, right? Maybe she had nothing else to do. Whatever it is, she went to another man and cheated on her husband. She then had a child. Okay. But I feel like because her husband did not take her back, and because that comfort of a normal life, that day to day, knowing that your bills are paid, you got food on the table, life is comfortable, that was gone. Now she was there to fend for herself. And I feel like every anger, every bit of annoyance, the loneliness she felt, whatever you want to call it, she took it out on Yolanda. The problem with this stupid bitch is that she never realized it was her fault in the first place. Number 2, time. Who has the time? Let's try and break this down. Let's forget the emotions for a second. Let's forget all the negativity for a second. Let's just have a look at what actually happened, right? She wakes up, kids are at home, she goes to work, right? Works all day, comes back. She's got to attend to the kids, make sure they're fed, put them to bed, Then she has time to herself. Do you know how hard that is? I'm a parent myself. You guys know that. Do you know how hard that is? Which is why I chose to work from home. I didn't want to be in some office all day and then have to come home and attend to the kids. Imagine me stuck in a commute, etc., etc. You guys know what I mean, right? It's a lot of work. So the question is, who has the time? Who has the time to do all of that and then at the same time make time to abuse your children? Like, how much hatred do you have to have in your heart for that to be the last thing you do every day, in a sense? And finally, number three, she's just a fucking moron. There's no other way to put it. As I said in point one, she made the mistake. She never took responsibility. And she now is going to spend the rest of her life in prison. Unfortunately, I don't think that's a severe enough punishment for what she inflicted. But I guess in many ways, I do believe in heaven and in hell. And I do believe that if you do die before the age of puberty, then you're granted heaven. You may agree, you may disagree, that's okay. But I guess that's the only crumb of comfort I can get in the case of Yolanda. Comment, tell me what you think.